You sort of wonder what's going to happen in the future with customers because we're in a CBD where it's business and banks, and if those people continue to work from home, it'll be difficult to keep up sort of having customers in the restaurant, I think.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The restrictions in place as part of the Stage 4 lockdown in Melbourne came down with a thud. Witnessing it from afar was troubling. For those living, it's cast a grey cloud over not only their everyday, but also when the sense of normality may return. Rosa Mitchell is the owner of Rosa's Canteen in the heart of Melbourne CBD. Rosa, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Anthony.
Thanks for joining us. You're in the second lockdown at the moment. How does this feel compared to the first lockdown? Can you compare the two?
Oh, I can. I've got to admit, with the first one, we've been working really hard, and it sort of felt like a little bit of a holiday. It's sort of a bit selfish in a way, but I got to do all the stuff that I want to do around the house and relax a bit, and sort of selfishly, it was a little bit sort of pleasant to be around the house. But this one, I'm finding it's been too long. It means the restaurant's really only been open not even 4 months so far this year. And
wow.
Yeah, I know. So I'm really itching to get back, and I've been trying to plan menus, and I sort of planned a spring menu, which now I don't think we're going to be able to use. So starting on a summer menu, and hopefully I can get that one sort of going. So, doing the menu, looking at all the food that I've missed out on because, I'm a seasonal cook. So things like artichokes are almost finished and won't be able to have any artichokes in the restaurant this year. Just all those little things that are, sort of have to wait another whole year.
You mentioned that the restaurant's only been open for about 4 months this year. Well, you're in the centre of the CBD.
If that, yeah.
What was the impact? What's been the impact for you and the restaurant during this period of time?
Look, sort of we're in a pretty good position. It's all my staff have sort of got JobKeeper and all that. So other than, one of my dishies who's not on Job Seeker or JobKeeper, everyone else is sort of being looked after. But you sort of wonder what's going to happen in the future with customers, whether because we're in a CBD where it's business and banks and sort of those sort of clients, if those people continue to work from home, it'll be, difficult to keep up sort of having customers in the restaurant, I think. So because there's just, we have an amazing clientele, a beautiful support of people that come in sort of quite regularly, and you sort of get to know them and, know all about them and their family and what they're doing and not doing. But if they continue to work from home once this is all over, it's going to be tough on the businesses, not only for myself but everyone around me.
As part of the lockdown, there's also restrictions on how far you can travel, and with no people in the city, you weren't able to do takeaway.
Well, we did it in the first lockdown, but it just wasn't enough to sort of, make enough money. And now, as it is, we just wouldn't have the clientele to come and pick it up because, when you're in the city, as you say, it's 5 kilometres, and most of the people living around us are students. So, they'd be sort of eating sort of cheaper type meals. So for us, it just didn't work. And we don't have the facilities, to have refrigerated vans and all those sorts of things, which you'd have to go out and, purchase or hire and do deliveries. And it's so many people out there doing it. It's a tough, it's very tough unless you really, sort of get a good sort of distribution point where you can sell it. So just hopefully it's all over and we'll just keep our clients and, go back to where we were.
As part of the travel restrictions, you haven't been able to get to the farm. How have you felt about that?
Well, unfortunately, because we can't go up, other than, sort of having overgrown grass, we won't be able to actually plant the veggies for next year because you would be starting to prepare the ground now and sort of starting to get your seedlings going. So, we don't want to do the wrong thing and go up there when there's restrictions. But yeah, it's going to be a tough year. I don't think we'll be having much in the way of veggies. Maybe something we can plant later on. But for me, the other thing is, fire risk. So we may have to get some sort of permit to go up and cut the grass, ready for, because if it gets out of whack, it's just going to be, a fire hazard. So we have to do something and go up. But, you want to do the right thing. You don't want to do the wrong thing and, go there when you can't. But at the same time, you have a property and sort of a fire sort of season coming up that you want to make sure that it's all safe.
You mentioned some concerns about reopening and whether or not the clientele will be in the city and workers returning to the city. How do you feel about restaurants, given what just happened, and moving forward, the sort of restaurants that will thrive in a post-COVID world?
It's going to be I think a lot of restaurants are not going to be able to come out of this. We're in a position that I think we're okay. We're going to be able to sort of get there. And as I said, we have a very loyal clientele, but we may have to, perhaps, as well as being open, we may have to offer takeaway as well to add a little bit more to the business because maybe people that sort of don't want to, maybe are working during the day or have to go into the office might be able to come and collect some sort of takeaway. So we're looking at that as well. But yeah, it's going to be tough for a lot of businesses to come out of this.
I know early on you were a hairdresser and you moved into the hospitality industry. How did that start happen?
Well, I mean, food's always been my passion, I think, since I was about 9 years old. My mum is one of 11 children, and I'm the eldest of 34 grandchildren.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're a large family. And so, I was around and it was 5 years before the next grandchild came along in the family. So, I had a lot to do with my grandmother and my parents were immigrants and they had to work. So at 9 years of age, I used to look after my little brothers, my 3 little brothers, and take them to school and sort of come home from school and, sort of cook meals and try and cook meals for mum. Not at 9 though, a little bit older. And and food was always my passion, to the point that even though I was Italian and I looked at all the Italian sort of food, I used to like looking at magazines and sort of experiencing new things, which I always said to my mum, can I try this? Can I try that? One of my favourite things my dad used to love was shepherd's pie, believe it or not. And he was a pretty fussy eater. But one of my neighbours made us a shepherd's pie once and he thought it was fantastic. So, I used to make that for Dad as well. So so that's how it started. But then as I got older, we became, got married. We were sort of founding members of Slow Food in Melbourne. So in those days, you got to meet quite famous chefs that are famous chefs now, but in those days we're sort of starting out. So, we used to get together and have amazing functions, and I always used to cook because that's what I always did. And, people would experience my Sicilian food, which was sort of not really that common then. No one really knew much about Sicilian food. And then I became quite good friends with Brigida Hafner, and her and James Broadway were going to open the Enoteca in Gertrude Street, which unfortunately is closing down, unfortunately, through all this. And I did a beautiful function in Tasmania with her. I asked if I could go along and help, and I think I just got hooked. And when we came back, I said, am I allowed to come and work for you? And she said, really? And I said, yes. So I was supposed to work a couple of days a week, and I ended up being daytime manager and was there for a couple of years. And then I left there and I then got introduced to Conchristopoulos, and the rest is, history. So Conchristopoulos gave me the journal Canteen, which was fantastic. I love it. I still miss it. I loved it. I loved the idea that I just cooked whatever I wanted on the day, and then people, have a blackboard menu outside and people would just see what was on offer on that day. And it was always, antipasto, a pasta main meal and a bit of dessert, and that was it. And it was a set price and it was fun. It was great. And then from there I went and worked, and Peter Bartholomew's offered me a restaurant, which is the Rosa's Kitchen, and so I started there, and then we opened Canteen, and there I am.
Well, you briefly touched on your Sicilian background, but could you tell us about Sicilian food? What makes it so different? Because there's so many regions in Italy and the food is so different from region to region.
But even in Sicily, the food is quite different from region to region. Like you do the East Coast, which has got the Greek influence, and the Greek, the East Coast, that's right, is, sort of Greek influenced, and there's the citrus, the oregano, the anchovies, and and then you go to the West, and it's couscous and saffron and currants and pine nuts, and you get the sweet and sour. And yeah, but as growing up, we never ate any of the food that was sort of, like couscous and that in my family was never. We never had it. It's something I explored later on. But so it's very, very different. And each little region has their own version of, focaccias and sfincione and pizza. And it could be, only sort of a distance of about 30 kilometres, and it can be quite a different dish. And, it'll say, the such and such from Ragusa or the such and such from Catania or Agrigento. And, yeah, it's quite varied. And so the influence in Sicily is amazing. It's, all sorts, the Arabic influence, the French, the Greeks, it just goes on and on. And even the Spanish. And so every person that's come and sort of invaded and come to Sicily has left a mark on their food. So, and it's interesting that they didn't sort of go up to the rest of Italy. It was more sort of Sicily. And I think that's where all the influence from all the different cultures came and made the food quite unique. When you look at agrodolce, which is just fantastic, I love it. It's one of my favourite things, which is this sweet and sour, which you think, well, where did that come from? And, of course, it's an Arabic influence.
How does that background influence the food that you do at Rosa's Canteen? How do you approach your interpretation of that cuisine?
Well, as I say, I grew up mainly sort of eating just, the basic food that we sort of always grew up and, always ate what's your father's favourite dishes and so on. So when I started to explore, even, well before I was in hospitality, and I would look at different dishes and I'd see all that, and I just wanted to try them all the time. So I now in the restaurant try and do, seasonally, of course, I try and do a little bit of everything and hopefully introduce people to things that they've never had before, like an agrodolce with rabbit or, with pumpkin and I love going back to Sicily and finding new dishes. And one of my life's dreams is to actually find lost recipes in Sicily, which apparently there's quite a lot. And even when I wrote my cookbook, I would get people coming to the restaurant and saying, in tears practically saying, oh my goodness, this particular recipe was lost in our family. We haven't had it since my nonna passed away and you've brought it back for us. And, people write to me constantly and say, we cook this dish all the time. We had it as children, didn't have it, now we're having it. And they sort of say, how grateful they are that I wrote the book. And, in my first cookbook, it was mainly just things that we grew up with or that were quite traditional Sicilian, but a few things were things that I grew up with that, were no longer sort of in a lot of homes, especially wild food.
You mentioned that you like to cook with the seasons. Given the society that we're in and there's lots of produce available all the time, how challenging is that these days for you to get access to quality?
Well, it's easy because if it's in season, it's going to be of the best quality. So I find what I find difficult is when customers come in and say, why don't you have eggplant on the menu? And you say to them, well, it's out of season. They go, but you can buy it in the shops. Well, you have to explain to them it's coming from Queensland and it's probably not really true to its flavour because it's often, and there's a difference between cooking eggplant in the summer and cooking eggplant in the winter. I find when you cook eggplant in the winter because it's been probably grown in a hothouse with excess water, it's very, very soft. It often breaks down, whereas in the season, height of its season, it's much easier to cook and has more flavour. And it's the same with any vegetable, whether it be fennel. Like I only use fennel at this time of the year in the restaurant because it's delicious, it's tender. But, when you buy baby fennel in the middle of summer, people say, oh, I don't really like fennel. It's quite strong, the baby fennel that you buy out of season. It's also quite fibrous. So you don't actually get that pleasure of eating it in its proper taste, and I think that's really important. So I'm very strict with season, very, very strict. And I had a waiter that worked for me once, and he go, "Why haven't you got eggplant on the menu? Where's the parmigiana? Eggplant." And I'd say, "But it's not in season." But he could never understand why I didn't do it. And I think the other thing that I love about it, I love waiting for that, whatever it be, whether it be fennel or artichokes. I love that anticipation of saying, "Oh, I can't wait," and it makes you appreciate it more when you do eat it. So I wait 12 months before I eat artichokes or asparagus. I never buy asparagus out of season, even though it's available all year round. And with anything, I just love. The only thing probably sometimes is fruit that's a bit more challenging, because it's not really much in the way of fruit in the winter, or even spring. Oh, there's a little bit in the spring, but I do a lot with citrus in the winter, like fennel, anchovies, and blood orange salad. What more? It's delicious, and I use it a lot in flavouring of maybe chicken and yeah.
Your restaurant is all about abundance and generosity and that warm sort of sense of hospitality. What does it take to deliver that in a restaurant?
Well, I think I treat my restaurant as if you were coming to my place for dinner or lunch. I like to think, that you go home and you feel quite full, as most Italians, and like to think that you don't want to come in. I often hear people saying, "Oh, we went to such and such and had to buy a hamburger on the way home." You wouldn't buy a hamburger once you've eaten it at my restaurant or my home, for that fact. So, it's just nice to think that people can come in and have a bowl of pasta and nothing else, because that is enough on your plate. So our servings are quite large compared to a lot of restaurants. But because I haven't had the training of a chef, so to speak, I am a home cook. There's no doubt about it. I am a home cook that's done very well, and so I guess I still treat it like that. I go out in my apron and talk to my customers, and I've even had customers say, "Oh, when are you going to make such and such?" And I go, "Well, you ring me and I'll make it for you. Just give me a bit of notice." So there's a nice atmosphere in that. Yeah, not always though, because sometimes they ask for things that are not in my repertoire, but I like that because there's a lovely familiarity with the customers, and they love to see me in the kitchen. I'm not that young anymore, and I try and only work 3 days a week when we are working, and unless my head chef goes on holidays, and then I work full time. But people love to see me in the kitchen, and that's the other thing, is that often a lot of restaurants, they have a name, and you think, "Oh yes," because people often say to me, to the waiters, "Is there a real Rosa?" If it's their first visit, and they go, "Yep, there she is in the kitchen," and they're quite surprised to have someone actually, because often you have a name in a restaurant and there's actually no person that sort of relates to that name. So it's and it's one big family at our place, and it's really lovely.
You've had all this time off just recently with the restaurant closed. How have you been spending your time?
Well, I'm not cooking as much as I cooked the first time, I can tell you that much. I cooked so much in the first thing that I put on so much weight. So what we're doing is, having said that, I've got the biggest pot of ragu on, ready to put some things in the freezer. But we're walking lots, a little bit of gardening here. We do have a very small garden here, but we've any spare space. We've got a few things planted, but we're trying to walk as much as we can. But and researching some recipes and trying to read some books. I said I was going to catch up on some movies, but I haven't really seen too many movies. But yeah, it's a more it's a bit relaxed this time, and just looking after ourselves and making sure we're staying healthy. And as I say, we walk every day up to 5K, 6Ks a day, if not more, which is lovely. And experiencing and finding places I didn't know existed in my local area. So, yeah, it's great. And picking wild food as I go along, of course.
You mentioned earlier that you're not a trained chef, but you're a successful cook and restaurateur. What advice would you give to young people in the industry that might be disillusioned at the moment, given the circumstances?
Oh, dear. It's a tough gig. I'll tell them that, because my son was a chef. He started young, and he got a little bit burnt out. I think, you don't go into it unless you really have a passion for it. For a start, don't do it because it's just something to do. I mean, it's a little bit easier now because there's a lot of there used to be a lot of bullying and all that in kitchens, which doesn't really happen now. Well, at least I hope it doesn't happen. But yeah, if you really got the passion for it, yes, by all means do it. And and just enjoy yourself, I guess. And I think that if they're young, they need to experience different cuisines as they go along. If someone is starting out in hospitality, like we've had a couple of apprentices over the years, and we treat them as if they're sort of just part of the family, and there's no bullying and no sort of yelling at them, and make sure that they enjoy their time there. But the most important thing is that as much as they love working for you, is that they have to experience other cuisines. I think it's very important. So we always say to them, you might stay 1 year, maybe 2, but you need to go on and, do other cuisines rather than stay in the one place all the time. Because that's how, as much as you can go to school and train and all that, the best education you get is to actually work in the restaurant and learn from your co-workers.
A little earlier, you mentioned that you were hoping to do a spring menu, but it looks like it'll be a summer menu.
It'll be summer, yeah.
What sort of things can we expect on the menu? What are you looking forward to cooking at that time?
Well, summer's the best time, of course. So, there's eggplants, there's capsicums, there's all sorts of things. And of course, one of the most important is tomatoes. So I don't buy any commercially grown tomatoes in the restaurant. I have 2 suppliers that supply me. Beautiful tomatoes. And so the tomatoes probably won't come in till about late January usually. And of course we grow some in the restaurant, and we had quite an abundance of tomatoes this year, but unfortunately with lockdown we didn't get to use them in the restaurant. So but I don't buy truss tomatoes or anything like that. So I'm known for my beautiful tomatoes because we serve them simply most of the time, and people always comment on how they taste like real tomatoes, or how tomatoes should be. So the tomato sort of season, we start roughly about late January when they first start to come in, and they can go as long as May sometimes, depending on the season. So it's all those sort of beautiful fresh produce, and I have an organic gentleman that I buy veggies from in near Dalesford called Mount Franklin Organics, and he grows beautiful things. And so we go up to the farm every weekend, and when we do have veggies in the garden, we pick what we have, and then we go past and we pick and we collect our veggies from Flow from Mount Franklin, and the kids love it when I turn up on Monday morning with boxes and boxes of sometimes we know what we have, sometimes we don't. And if I've gone to a farmer's market or something up there on the weekend and I see something, I'll just take it along, and we just cook whatever we can with what we have, as well as a planned menu, of course.
When you're back in the restaurant and it's open again and you've got customers coming in, what are you most looking forward to with that?
Oh, I think just working, to be honest, and just cooking. Even though I'm cooking here at home, it's just not the same. And also I think seeing customers, and because we've got so many regulars. We have people that actually eat every week at our restaurant, or we have one gentleman that eats almost every day.
Wow.
So we have a lot of regulars. So it'd be nice to see the old sort of faces coming back, and it seems like. Well, we haven't seen them for nearly 12 months. So, it's like seeing old family back again. But, and just to cook and just, because I love produce, I'm really, produce driven, and I love to buy things like, I don't buy my honey again. I buy my honey in Dalesford from a gentleman, quite an elderly gentleman. Knock on his door, ring his bell, and he comes out, and I buy my honey and supply. He supplies me all year round. So I try and buy sort of from little producers where I can, which is really nice. So I'm looking forward to supporting them as well.
How important are those producers to you, and what sort of impact have they had?
I mean, I just love sort of finding these people, because not only do they have a passion in growing or producing or the products themselves. I just love cooking with, it's like you've grown them yourself, or you've made the things yourself. So, I just love, and that's why people love to come to my restaurant, I think, because they taste produce that is quite homegrown in a way. It's for me, it's very important. That's why I don't have tomatoes in the restaurant any other time, because it's not in season. It doesn't taste good. You only want to eat produce that tastes good. And for me, it's very important because my food is quite simple. I don't do elaborate things. I don't do foams, or I don't do whatever else, those fancy stuff is. So for me, if I do a simple pasta with just basil and tomato, you can do the tomatoes and buy them, rock hard from a supermarket, or you can have this amazing, which I'm not going to tell you where I get my other tomatoes, these amazing, huge, funny-looking tomatoes. They're quite massive, like, you fit one in your hand. And just to have that and just simply toss with a bit of olive oil, the difference is just, you can't compare them because one is just full of flavour with just 3 ingredients. I don't have to add sugar to the tomato. I don't have to add, lots of different flavours to make it taste better because it's already there. The flavour is already there. And you get that flavour from produce that is good and homegrown and, very important.
When your restaurant opens up again, how are you going to celebrate that evening?
I'll probably put my feet up and be terribly, terribly tired because I noticed the last time when I went back, because we're on a reduced staff, we went back and I couldn't believe how tired I was getting. My feet were getting so sore. But I will hopefully, if I can hug my co-workers and my staff, give them a big hug. But I dare say that I'll come home and put my feet up and have a bit of a rest. But it is hard for me to work, a full week, but I love what I do. I absolutely love it. And even though, in normal times I only work 3 days a week, sometimes I wish I could be there every day, but I want to keep going as long as possible. So I'll have to try and not work too hard. But, it'll be lovely. I might probably make some biscuits and give them out to all my customers or something to welcome them back.
Oh, wow. Well, with this period of time to reflect, has it changed you, and how will you look at this period of time in our lives?
That's an interesting question. I will be grateful for what I have, and be grateful that hopefully this is the one and only time that we experience these circumstances. I know it's 1 in 100 years, but and I would like to think that, my children and their children don't have to go through this at all. But I think, I'll just be grateful for what I have and where I am and what I do have, which I think is really important. And, we don't need, which I think is really important, we don't need, a lot of money, or we don't need a lot of, sort of comfort things. I think as long as you've got good family around you and good food, of course, it should be enough. And that's what I think I'm experiencing at the moment because, you're just at home, you eat, you walk, I'm lucky enough that I have my son and his girlfriend that live with us. So we do have 4 of us sort of in and out sort of the house. So, there's a little bit more for us to do. But it's just, be grateful for what we have and enjoy what we do have because it can all be taken away from us.
Well, Rosa, we're so honoured to have you on Deep in the Weeds. You're an absolute icon of the industry, and we're very touched to have your time. Keep in touch very much.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, very much looking forward to the summer menu, and hopefully you can get down to Melbourne.
Me too.
And enjoy it.
I look forward to giving you a good bowl of pasta.
Oh, wow. It sent a shiver down my spine. I can't wait for that. Take care and thanks again.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.